97, Clinton administration planning to send U.S. troops to Africa. Our troops are presently in over 100 countries. U.S. troops are in over 100 countries around the world. And we have thousands of Russian, as I said, troops in our country. Here's a couple of items I'd like to mention to you. Oh, by the way, let's go through these flyers. Yeah, keep going. This is the Spotlight. It's a magazine out of Washington, D.C. This was February 27, 1995. Reno wants a national hit team that could operate anywhere in the United States, talking about rapid deployment, strike force within the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and 2,500 personnel, would include military personnel. And this is against our Constitution. There's a law that was passed right after the Civil War that military personnel will not be used against civilians in the United States. The Marines attacked New Orleans and Mobile. Our U.S. Marines and troops have been involved in joint venture operations with the civilian law enforcement in going through villages and towns in mock attacks. Now, your forces in Canada are presently being trained, your armed forces are presently being trained by RCMP in the art of urban warfare, going from house to house and knocking the door down, taking people into custody, and killing people and taking over their property. This is one removed from the military. This is a military man told his father, who told me, Canadian Armed Forces. Joint military operation is confirmed not through the mainstream media, but a Russian general on television in Moscow confirmed it. In the United States, we talked about mock attacks on cities. There were 21 cities, and finally, the last one was Charlotte, North Carolina. So there were so many complaints that they discontinued it. Now they're building a mock village in Utah, $200 million. And I have intelligence information they're also building a mock village in Canada for the same purpose. What's going to happen to us, folks? Well, we'll probably end up in slave labor camps. Well, as a matter of fact, this memo says that that's what's going to happen to us. This is a memorandum, Department of the Army, and 1994, draft Army regulation on civilian inmate labor program. It tells about the policy. This is just the cover sheet, by the way. I have the details, but it's too involved to show you tonight because we have so many other topics I want to discuss. And I want to particularly discuss the children and the problem with the children in Canada and the United States, which we'll go into probably the second session after the break. But this talks about what's going to happen to us and the procedure that's going to be followed. Now, when the New World Order forces take over, we see here that certain states in the United States will have troops from certain countries. Texas will have Czechoslovakian troops. California will have troops from the Ukraine. I wish I could give you an update on Canada. I don't know what Canada's going to have. But since I'm living in Nevada, I don't see Nevada on there, but I do spend, oh, here's Nevada right there. That's Utah. I do spend a lot of time in California, so I guess I'm going to have to learn how to speak the Ukraine language. Here's an article. It tells us a little bit about how our constitutional rights are being deteriorated on a regular basis. This is again the Spotlight, which is not a mainstream publication, but what we call an alternative source of the news. And this is a bill that was passed, H.R. 666, that's how brazen they are, passed by our U.S. Congress that takes away the necessity of having a search warrant to search your property. This is a survey that was conducted at 29 Palms, a Marine base, California, and there was, I think, 150 questions. One of the questions asked of the Marines, would you shoot a fellow American if you asked him for his gun, he refused to turn the gun over to you? 25% of the Marines said they would, 75% said they would not. And the Marines that have said that they would are being promoted, the others are being relegated elsewhere. I made so much of an issue out of this that I received a call one day from a colonel. Hold on just a minute. No. I received a call one day from a colonel at the Marine base, and he said, Mr. Gunderson, I want you to know that that was a survey that I conducted, asked of the Marines, 150-some questions, legitimate survey in connection with my master's degree where I'm going to school. And I said, yes, Colonel, I believe that. Of course I believe that. He said it had nothing to do with a survey in connection with whether the Marines would shoot or wouldn't shoot a fellow American. I don't believe that in a million years. But at least I got his attention. Gorbachev and Bush and others had a meeting September 27th, October 1st. Elitists met at the conference in San Francisco to discuss the New World Order and who will be governed there. And those present included, let's see, Margaret Thatcher was there, and George Bush. The others included Ted Turner, CNN, George Shultz, former Secretary of the State, President of the Soviet Breakaway Republic, Turkey, Czech Republic, and so on and so forth. Bilderberger were there, ex-Prime Minister of the Netherlands, and it goes on down, as you can see. 8,000 business leaders were there from 75 countries. By the way, Gorbachev is living the life of Riley, actually the life of a king. He's over here in the United States touring this country, makes $10,000 a speech, and they have given him, turned over the Presidio, which is a plush Army base in the San Francisco area, in the San Francisco Bay, as a matter of fact. They've given him the Presidio facilities for him to live on and live. This is something I don't understand. I don't know what's going on here, but I thought it'd be of interest to you. It's an article that appeared in the New York Magazine, and I don't have the date shown, obviously, but anyway, this is about 2 years old. Every day the Russian mob receives a shipment of up to $1 billion in fresh $100 bills. The money is flown out of JFK, comes straight to from the United States Federal Reserve, and this is an exclusive investigation. And by the way, this Friedman, the author, I've tried to reach him, and he's disappeared on us. I don't know what happened to it. The date, I can't see the date right offhand.
They put him in with the money.
Yeah, maybe he went to Russia. Maybe he got his 10%. But I don't understand that one. I mean, I don't have an explanation for that. But the Federal Reserve, I might mention this, the money came out of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is not a government agency, it's a private corporation. And it's a privately held stock. And you know, we pay income tax to the IRS, Internal Revenue Service, every year. Excuse me, the money we pay to the IRS goes to the Federal Reserve. It does not go toward paying off the national debt in America. It goes toward paying the interest on the national debt in America. And the Federal Reserve is part of the International Monetary Fund, World Monetary Fund, which includes banks in the Warburg Bank in Germany, Kudlow Bank, London, Rome, Italy, and New York, Chase Manhattan Bank. These are the big boys. These are the boys, the Bilderbergers, the Trilateral, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, we're talking about POWs now. This is another area that I'm not real sure about, in that I don't quite understand it, but I think I do at the same time, but I don't have the documentation. We left behind in World War II 35 to 50,000 GIs in Russia. We've never made an attempt to get them back. In the Korean War, 83 to 8,400 GIs were left behind, never made an attempt to get them back. Vietnam War, Southeast Asia, around 2,500, never made an attempt to get them back. In fact, our government says they are no longer alive, do not exist. They do. We have absolute documentation that they have lived in recent years. And I have information from my inside sources at the CIA that the CIA sent a hit team into Southeast Asia to eliminate them, to ensure that they would not be identified and later made to embarrass U.S. politicians. Why are they doing this? I can only say that it's probably because the New World Order wants to reduce the world population to 500 million. The population in the United States would be 20 million. The population in Canada would be 3 million. You're what, 29 million now? 30 million? And because they want to make sure that their elite have enough food so that they can live for years and years and years. And also, I might mention also that in America, and I can't say this is happening in Canada, because ever since I've been here it's been cloudy and I can't see up beyond the clouds. But in America, but I love it here, by the way. I'm really impressed with Canada. I love the people. I'm really impressed with your teenagers. They're so nice and neat. Ours wear baggy pants, running around smoking dope, and it's unreal. But in America, there are what we call contrails. And I have a radio talk show. By the way, you can probably pick me up if you have a satellite. In fact, I know you can. Some Canadians are listening to me. It's on the back of the flyer that was passed out to you. I'm on a satellite that's transponder 1 Galaxy and so on and so forth. Anyway, I'm receiving reports from all over the country, New York, Los Angeles, North Dakota, Colorado, Wyoming, Louisiana, Virginia, Nevada, that jets flying very high altitude are leaving contrails. This is condensation trails from jets. A normal contrail will dissipate in probably a short period of time. These contrails last for probably an hour or an hour and a half, and they end up expanding, becoming a larger cloud and larger cloud. There's a fellow in Wyoming who called in on my show and claimed that these are ethyl dibromide, which is a chemical that was banned in the United States in 1983, and it's a form of poison, of course. But the New World Order doesn't want us to live, folks. If you're 40 years of age or over, and most of us in this room are, as I look around, we're not productive enough for them. And so I think many of us will be eliminated. And you know, the people that they're using against us, like the Satanic movement, we're going to get into the Satanic movement a little later on. The Satanists and the CIAs and the corrupt law enforcement officers, the people they're using against us, they're expendable too. What they don't realize is they're going to use them, and then they're not going to be around either. And I'm sure that there's some of you in the audience here, and you're going to go down with the rest of us. You're not going to make it either, if they have anything to say about it. There's some of us that will make it, and I think many of us will. Anyway, this is a story about the POWs. Reported that they were left behind in North Korea. Well, actually, it's 83, 84. That's the next.
You want to go hold on?
No, hold those. Okay, let me just touch base on a couple of items here, and we'll take a little break. I think. Let's see. We've been going about an hour. I'm going to come forth with a few little items. H.R. 1617 is a bill that was passed by Congress, and parents will have to collaborate with the government to raise their children. There'll be certain regulations and restrictions. We're going to talk more about children, by the way. We're going to spend a lot of time on children in the next session. On October 28, 1998, the government will have the capability to tap all telephones in the United States. In 1999, a national ID card, before you can hire or be hired an individual, you'll have to check with Washington, D.C. and see if Washington, D.C. will approve of it. It's called a national ID card, like a driver's license. And we also have in America, and I know you have it up here, what we call outcome-based education. That's the United Nations courses that are advocated by our Department of Education. Outcome-based education is this. There are 3 levels of intelligence: the highest, the middle, and the lowest. And the schools are instructed to teach all the students at the lowest level. We talked a little bit earlier about camps. I've talked to an ex-con in the United States who told me that prisoners, federal prisoners, nonviolent, have for the last several years been working on converting a military bases to internment camps. They're paying them $5.50 a day. Also, we have a federal execution center in the United States in Terre Haute, Indiana. It's a new one. Houses 50 individuals. We haven't had a federal execution since 1963. Our prisons, we've built over 200 new prisons in the United States in recent years. The former civilian head of the prison system in the state of Texas, I was visiting with him on one occasion about 9 months ago. Asked him about the prison system in Texas. He said there are 8 brand new prisons in Texas that are staffed, but there's no inmates in the facility. So they're staffed with no inmates there. So our military bases are being converted. Federal Execution Center. We have underground cities in the United States. Our sources in Montana talk about huge caves that are housing huge Russian helicopters. There are sources that have told us about underground cities that are being built and have been built in America, specifically Kansas City and Las Vegas. There is a new machine, a laser machine, that goes at the rate of 10 miles an hour that goes through solid, hard rock. And we have been told that there is a tunnel that goes, a highway tunnel that goes from the East Coast to the West Coast. In Alaska, we have the high-frequency active auroral research program, it's otherwise known as HAARP, and it can jam global communications. It can disrupt human mental processes. It can change weather patterns, and it unnaturally impacts upon the Earth's atmosphere. And this is the shocker, folks. If you own a car that's been built in the last 6 years, they can push a button and your car stops in place. You don't go any place. There's a computer chip in the electric system. I own a 1987 automobile now, by the way. I just bought one. But I don't think it's going to do me good on the freeways of Los Angeles, because everybody else will be sitting there stacked up. I think the thing to do is buy a motorcycle. We talked about military operations with Russia. We talked about slave labor. 666, I'm going through my notes. I got a little ahead of myself. POWs. Here's something else that I think is of interest to you. The Chinese family, Rayati, contributed several $100,000 to the Bill Clinton campaign in exchange for Clinton designating the 1.7 million acres in Utah and Arizona as federal property. What happened there is that Clinton, with the swipe of the pen, took the 1.7 acres away from private held property, people hold private property, the businesses and so forth, told them to get off, they're through. And as a result, we lost a valuable source of coal, and now that coal, the Lippo Group has been organized in China by the Rayati family, and that coal is being imported in the United States through Senator Dianne Feinstein's husband, Mr. Blum. Typical politics. 9 million acres in California, 47 of the 98 parks, national parks in the United States, under the control of the United Nations. We think this is where many of the foreign troops are being held. We have a mass seizure of farms through the IRS in the United States. And one area that is of interest to not only us but also to you is the MK Ultra program. MK Ultra is a CIA mind control program that's been active for years. After World War II, German scientists, instead of going to Russia, many of them came over to the Northern Hemisphere. They were divided between Canada and the United States, and they continued their experiments involving genocide, and this included mind control programs, Manchurian Candidate, etc., etc. Now you recall back in the 50s when many of you Canadian citizens were used as guinea pigs on the LSD experiments. That was part of it. It was only until years later that you learned about it through various means. Americans were also victims of that LSD experiment program. People entered the hospital in Rochester, New York for minor operations and were experimented on by the U.S. government unknown to them. What is the MK-Ultra program? How does it occur and what happens? It's a combination, and by the way, the CIA is they're masters at this. I think they picked it up from the Germans and developed it further. But it is administered through a shock treatment, hypnosis, drugs, and torture. And the human mind has a defense device that will split. And if it's a traumatic experience, you won't remember it. Now you remember Princess Margaret, her driver, can't remember what happened. That's typical of what would happen to the mind. And the CIA has been using it for years. They train individuals to be assassins, and they can pick up the phone and call that individual and say green, blue, red, whatever the signal is, the target word, the trigger word, and he automatically has a target. He snaps into one of his personalities and goes out and eliminates Mr. XYZ. And then he's programmed to commit suicide, usually. So there's no evidence. In the second session, we are going to talk a little about the taking away of guns and some of these mass murders that have occurred. And I personally feel, although I cannot prove it, that these are the result of MK-Ultra mind control programs. There's another area that is of grave concern to me, and I'm sure it's of grave concern to you, and that involves the children that are being taken out of the homes, Canada and the United States. Most recently, I had a series of cases where the children are taken from the mother and the father, or the mother or the father, and oftentimes where there's a divorce, given over to the perpetrator, where there's allegations of sexual exploitation on the part of the child. And the Child Protective Services refuses to protect the child. The courts refuse to protect the child. And this, eventually, the child is put up for adoption and disappears into the system. In the United States, each child is taken out of the home. The county is given $24,000 per year. In my county alone, Clark County, Las Vegas, Nevada, there were 22,860 some children taken out of the homes last year. This adds up to $68 million that the federal government gave to the county, Clark County. And special care children, where they have a health problem, etc., the state or the county can get up to $250,000 per year. And in order to sustain the system in the United States, it's necessary for 3,000 children per day to be taken away from the families. And I might mention that in many instances, as I said earlier, the children are being sexually abused, the courts don't protect the child, and the child slips into the system, in some instances never to be heard again. There's a book out written by Robert W. Nicholson. You want to stand up, Bob? Rob? There's Rob. Fantastic book. It talks about what's going on in British Columbia and right here in your own community. And this book is entitled Stolen Innocence. It talks about the child problem, pornography, pedophilia, Satanism. Let me just thumb through here and read a couple of items from the book itself. This talks about, this is on page 27, it talks about in 1995, British Columbia's Minister of Social Services was subjected to the scrutiny of a judicial inquiry. The inquiry was headed by the Honorable Judge Thomas Grove and was initiated by the tragic events surrounding the life and death of a 5-year-old young man named Matthew John Vadrul, I guess it is. The primary purpose of the inquiry was to investigate the competency and efficiency of the child protection services available to the children of the province. And what did the judge say? Judge Grove was quoted as saying, "There are many children in BC who are not being protected. There are many children who are suffering from abuse and are being neglected. The Child Protection Service, which is designed to protect these children, is having considerable difficulty in doing that, and in fact isn't doing it. There doesn't appear to be any organized way in which the ministry learns of these deaths." A former ministry social worker, now in private practice, supported the opinion of an individual named Carrie Simpson when she stated to the writer, quote, "How is anything ever going to change when all the government primarily did was allow the same people to remain in their same positions and simply change the name of the agency? All hell broke loose with the Canadian Airborne Regiment over the killing in Somalia. I can't understand why our government doesn't have the same concerns for the hundreds of Canadian children that are abused and murdered right here in Canada every year." During 1994, 33 children involved with the Ministry of Social Services died. Between November 1995 and July 1996, another 49 children involved with the Ministry of Social Services died. Of the latter children, 14 were in direct care of the ministry. The ministry was aware of complaints of abuse and neglect involving the other 35 children. 4 of the deaths are suspected or alleged homicide cases, with another 4 being classified as undetermined. Let me also read a little bit from chapter 4 on pedophilia, a big problem, not only here but also in the United States. The number of children maltreated in Canada on an annual basis would be 102,994, broken down into categories using the same formula. The calculation identifies the following figures and corresponding comparative figures that are suspected to be closer to reality. National case of neglect annually, 44,223. Suspected, 88,446. Now, national cases of physical abuse annually, 25,870. Suspected, 51,740. National cases of sexual abuse annually, 17,434. Suspected, 34,868. Some more figures, which I think you will find interesting. Page 79. By the way, this book is available at the table. And be sure to take a look at it. How many do you have over there? A few that are available? Rob? Just a few, okay. This is a story about the judicial corruption. Judicial corruption is no longer simply an unconfirmed suspicion. It is considered to be a publicly recorded fact. In 1995, the province newspaper published a story which fairly clearly stated that an unidentified member of an organized crime syndicate had disclosed the fact that crime syndicates do have control over several judges in British Columbia, in fact, that the authorities appear to have concealed from the public for the same time. So, you have the same problem here as we have in America. And in closing this, before we take a break, and then we'll come back, we'll talk about Satanism, talk more about international trafficking in children, involving children in Canada also. Let me just mention that we have a presidential directive, and it's Presidential Directive 25. And in the event of a crisis, the President of the United States has the power to pass this power on to, or the authority to pass the power on to the Secretary General of the United Nations. Scary, isn't it? In closing on this first half of the lecture, let me mention this also. An article which I picked up in the United States on Canada before I left. Let me read from this article. It says here, the multilateral agreement on investment, MAI, means a world without borders. We're talking about Canada now, ruled by a virtual dictatorship of the world's most powerful central bankers, commercial banks, and multinational corporations. The article goes on and says it's a world where small countries like Canada don't count for even less, and where citizens as voters would count for nothing at all because it wouldn't matter who got elected. Any government would be almost powerless to affect and improve our destiny. The world is an absolute certainty if we sit on our hands and do nothing. For those who find the prospect frightening and totally unacceptable, concerted action is required soon, very soon. It may be too late. Are any of you who are not familiar with this multilateral agreement on investments? You're all familiar with it. Understand it's already passed, is that right?
No, not yet.
It hadn't passed?
No,
In July? Well, I hope you're able to defeat it. By the way, folks, those of us who are involved in these issues, we closed in the first session of the first part of the lecture, and those of us who are involved have difficulty paying the bills. My full retirement goes to my radio show and to research and to stay abreast of what's going on in these various fields. And there is a home-based business, if you're interested, that is helping me financially. And if you're interested, I'll give you the number. Give it a call and inquire into it, because the economics are such now and in the future that it's going to be more difficult to pay your bills, and I know that. So dial 1-760-730-3033 if you're interested in a home-based business. You can operate this right out of your home. I'll repeat that. 1-760-730-3033. Second half, we will talk about international trafficking of children. We'll talk some more about child protective services. We'll talk about satanic cults. We'll talk about preschools, which are designed all over the world for the satanic cults to get their hands on our 2-, 3-, and 4-year-old children, to indoctrinate them into Satanism. I personally worked the McMartin PreSchool case in Manhattan Beach, California. I have slides from that case. I have slides from an abandoned satanic site, which I think you'll find very interesting. So let's take a break and we'll be back in just a few minutes.
Do you have a website?
Website's on the back sheet of the paper that you have. I'm not talking about this water, but it reminded me of the fact that, I don't know about this, the best water I've had in a long time is in Canada, by the way. But in the United States, they're putting fluoride in all our water. Fluoride is something they use on rats to make them docile. And in addition to that, the contrails, which I mentioned, are going across the country, and if it's ethyl dibromide, that's a poison. And you know, every time we turn around, we have the government coming after us. It's a question of what are we going to do in the future? Well, I think right now we have to educate ourselves, educate each other. But in discussing the drug situation, in the 1950s there were experiments, as I mentioned, on citizens, Canadian citizens and Americans. But, and also I've been told since I've entered the Kootenai Valley in the 1980s during the Cold War with Russia and the United States, that there were experiments on the heavy population of Japanese and Russians there, because they figured that, you know, who cares about the Japanese and the Russian? And that came from a good, credible source. On the break also, I was talking to some gentlemen, and we mentioned the Desert Storm, and I didn't have it scheduled on the lecture, but I can tell you a little bit about Desert Storm and reduction of the population. It fits hand in glove with that. There were 28 nations that went to war, and of the 28, 27 inoculated their soldiers. The only nation that did not inoculate the soldiers was France. And by the way, the Canadian troops and the American troops were both inoculated. I don't know the report from Canada, but in America there were over 700,000 GIs. And right today, 4/5 of them have been washed out of the service because they can't even do a push-up. And they're being replaced by the new U.S. Army. So we got rid of the U.S. government got rid of some really well-seasoned, solid soldiers. And they came back, and their children were born deformed, their wives obtained this disease, whatever it is. And the story that we have, based on documentation from a nurse, Joyce Riley, is that they poisoned our boys, and they poisoned the other boys. That would include the Canadians too, by the way. And we have over 15,000 deaths that we know of from Desert Storm. So it goes on and on and on. The second half, I'd like to start out with Satanism. Satanism is a very important part of the operation by the New World Order. As you recall, I talked about Lucifer and the Illuminati. Well, they have used the Satanic movement to further their cause all along. And as a result of my involvement in the McDonald case, and my research thereafter, there are more than 3 million practicing Satanists in America. That comes from 3 sources. A source in confidential source in South Bay, Los Angeles, 200,000 population, says there are 3,000 there. Lincoln, Nebraska, population 200,000. Another source, 3,000 there. Iowa City, Iowa, a third source, 100,000 people in Iowa City, Iowa, 1,500 there. So if you project those figures, it's 3.75 million Americans are actively involved in the cause. And those are sources, those 3 sources are people who themselves were actively involved. Now, I want to also mention that 3 separate sources have informed me that there are between 50 and 60,000 human sacrifices every year by the cults in the United States. I believe that. Death or murder for these people is like you and I having a drink of water. And there's some interesting background in connection with that. There are certain leaders in America who have been active for years. One is Michael Aquino, more generally referred to as Mike by a friend of mine. And the other is Anton LaVey. Michael Aquino and Anton LaVey were involved together in the Church of Satan in the Bay Area. They both have tremendous egos. Actually, Anton LaVey had an ego because he died recently. But Aquino split and established the Temple of Set, and 2 separate groups. Anton LaVey passed away, died October 29th of last year. That would have been a great honor to him to die on a satanic holiday, which he did. Michael Aquino is still alive and kicking. Michael Aquino was walking through the Presidio one day, and a young boy says to his mama, "Mommy, that's the man that molested me at the preschool." And so the mother reported Aquino. There was an 18-month investigation by the Department of the Army, and of course nothing came of that. In the meantime, Aquino was transferred from the Presidio area, I mentioned Gorbachev's there now, they closed it down, to St. Louis, where he was placed in charge of the personnel files for the U.S. Army Reserve. And in the meantime, after the investigation cleared, Aquino came back to the Bay Area, continued with his Temple of Set activity, and about 1.5 years ago, I heard that he had been actively involved at the University of Arizona in a confidential operation, mind control program that was classified on behalf of the U.S. government. So Michael Aquino continues his nasty, dirty work. He's appeared on Geraldo. I don't know if you recall the TV show about the late 1980s where Geraldo did a special on Satanism. It was the highest rated TV documentary in the history of television. But did Geraldo ever catch hell afterwards? And as a result, of course, Geraldo has discontinued doing any shows on satanic cult type activity. I appeared on that show. Aquino was on that show. Zin LeVay was on that show. Father Labar, a Catholic priest on the East Coast who specializes in helping Catholics who are victims of the satanic movement, ritual abuse, etc., was on the show. There was so much pressure and they made such a fool, they thought they made a fool out of Geraldo that he, as I said, he discontinued any shows of that type again after that. But that's what happens when you try to expose these people. They come after you with all their forces. And the mainstream media is certainly one of the strongest forces that they use to discredit you, to embarrass you, whatever means that they can to ensure that you're not an effective person when you take on this element in our society. I mentioned earlier about when I came out with the McDonald case and furnished a 1,200 page report, and then I started hearing information, receiving information that I was homosexual, suffering from mental problems, trafficking drugs. Yeah, I probably am suffering from mental problems. I would be involved in these things. But anyway, this came back to me, and then they tried to, as I said, they tried to set me up on a fraud case in Dallas, and put a girl on me to try to get me on a drug case. And they have not had much success in that regard. They've made several attempts on my life. I've had 3 times that gunmen were waiting for me through divine intervention. I did not go where I was supposed to go on that particular occasion, those particular occasions. I've had 3 other occasions when there have been accidents that were obviously a result of their dirty work. The last was in '93 when the lug nuts on the car I was driving between Lincoln and Omaha, Nebraska came off, and well, the lug nuts were loosened actually. The wheel came off, and I was doing 75 miles an hour down the freeway, and the wheel, all of a sudden the front of the car goes like this, and I look over, and here about 15 feet in the air is the right front wheel spinning up into the air. Anyway, I was able to control the car, no problem. The CIA have all kinds of means that they use, devices they use to kill people. They are specialists at assassinations. One of the most popular is a chemical that they use to induce a heart attack that's non-traceable. Just the last day or so, McDougal, who was the mouthpiece and getting ready to talk on the Whitewater case in Arkansas, the real estate escapade on the part of the Clintons, in jail, died of a heart attack. Not surprising. I've talked to a number of my CIA friends who told me about professional assassins and killings and murders that they've been involved in. And one of them in particular, Chip Tatum, who's gone public, by the way. Chip dropped out when they asked him to take direct action against a fellow American. He said, I'll do it against a foreigner, but I won't do it against a fellow American. And he was in a meeting, a Bilderberger meeting, as a matter of fact, according to Chip. Let's see, George Bush was there. Mr. Peepers, head of the CIA at the time, Bill Colby. Henry Kissinger was there. And they were discussing the future. And Chip was being given an assignment to go after Ross Perot during the election that we had here 6 years ago. And to do so, he had to go after, fake, I don't know the details, but it involved his daughter. And you recall somebody did come out and threaten his daughter. He dropped off and then backed out of the election, then came forward. He was taking a number of votes away from George Bush. Anyway, Chip Tatum said, I've had enough. And he had been collecting mementos, I'll put it, for a number of years, including the flight logs and making notations on the back of the flight logs on the CIA drug operations coming up from Central America. And he had also been recording the conversations of the passengers, including people that rode in his plane that were close to the Bush and Clinton administration. Buddy Young was one of them. He also had direct contact with Ollie North. And they would be passengers on his planes on occasion, and he had a tape recorder back there, and he was recording them. Chip dropped this video on the table and said he had enough, and he walked out. And that was the last he had anything to do with the CIA. Of course, you can imagine what the CIA did to him. They came after him, charged him with the crime, and he served time. He's out now, and he's telling them all. He'd be a good speaker for you, by the way. You'd enjoy having Chip come up here. I'll talk to Rob about bringing Chip up here. Anyway, that's just one example. I have another friend. I won't mention his name. He's exposed it. He came forward. He decided he wanted out. He called his wife, who's Swedish. She was in Germany. He said, go to the safety deposit box, get everything out, and I'll meet you in Stockholm. She never made it. She was found dead the next day on a railroad track, suicided. And they charged him with the crime, and he's served his time. He's out on probation right today. But they deal with the people that are turncoats with swiftness and very direct. And if they can't kill you or they don't kill you, they put you in jail and discredit you. I have another friend, Michael Reconasuto, who's part owner of the Hercules manufacturing in Silicon Valley, developed the bomb, the electrohydrodynamic gaseous fuel device, which was used in Oklahoma City. And we're going to talk about Oklahoma City in a few minutes. I think you'll enjoy that. Anyway, Michael was set up on a drug operation. He's now serving 26 years. Michael's in his 45 years old. He's only served about 4 years, so he'll never see the light of day other than through Crowbars, the Crowbar Motel. But I mentioned a few moments ago about the Satanic movement. It's alive, it's well. There's a lot of traffic between Seattle and BC, Vancouver, and what's the island, Victoria? A lot of satanic activity on Victoria Island. I've heard about that island for years, ever since I've been involved in these issues and been researching it. Exchange of children, exchange of information, exchange of research, data, exchange of bodies, and so forth. What do they do? Where do they come up with all this? Well, one of the theorists, or authors you might say, that's widely accepted, and his philosophies are widely used and practiced by the cults, are Aleister Crowley. He liked to be called Crowley, because it rhymed with holy, but I won't give him that benefit. Aleister Crowley wrote a couple of books, and I'm going to tell you and show you what he wrote about human sacrifices. This is kind of crumpled a little bit. It's been well used. This is the book Magic in Theory and Practice. And this is on page 93 of the bloody sacrifice. Blood is very important to these people. They drink it, eat it, whatever. Blood is the life. And this is what it says here. It would be unwise to condemn as irrational the practice of those savages who tear the heart and liver from an adversary and devour them while yet warm. In any case, it was the theory of the ancient magician that any living being is a storehouse of energy, varying in quantity according to the size and health of the animal, and in quality according to its mental and moral character. At the death of the animal, this energy is liberated suddenly. The animal should therefore be killed within the circle, or the triangle, that's a pentagram, of course, as the case may be, so that its energy cannot escape. An animal should be selected whose nature accords that of the ceremony. Thus, by sacrificing a female lamb, one would not obtain any appreciate quantity of the fierce energy useful to a magician who was invoking Mars. In such a case, a ram would be more suitable, and this ram should be virgin. The whole potential of its original total energy should not have been diminished in any way. Now listen to this. For the highest spiritual working, one must accordingly choose that victim which contains the greatest and purest force. A male child of perfect innocence and high intelligence is the most satisfactory and suitable victim. That's one of the reasons they get their hands on these kids. This is another book by Aleister Crowley. The Law is for All. This is their justification for rape and sex. Illicit sex, that is. Moreover, the B666, that's Aleister Crowley himself, advises that all children shall be accustomed from infancy to witness every type of sexual act, as also the process of birth, lest falsehood, fog, and mystery stupefy their minds, whose error else might thwart and misdirect the growth of their subconscious system of self-symbolism. What they're saying there is, go ahead. What he's saying there is, try it.
Everybody stand on your head.
It may therefore be considered improper as a general rule for your sexual gratification to destroy, deform, or displease any other star. Mutual consent to the act is a condition thereof. It must, of course, be understood that such consent is not always explicit. There are cases when seduction or rape may be emancipation or initiation to another. Such acts can only be judged by their results. In other words, it's okay to rape somebody if you're emancipating them. It kind of explains in a nutshell their approach to sex and human sacrifices. Now, is there anybody here that does not know about the McMartin case? Okay, the McMartin case was in, no, let's turn it off just a minute, let me get a little background. The McMartin case took place in Manhattan Beach, California in the early 1980s, 82 I think it was, when it broke. A young man came home, told his mother he was sexually molested at the preschool, the McMartin PreSchool, a very affluent area, right on the ocean. It's upper middle class to rich, wealthy people. The McMartin PreSchool was, they had a waiting list as long as your arm. People were clamoring to get into the school with their kids, very prestigious. They were the pillars of the community. So a little boy came home, told his mother went to the authorities. They began an in-depth investigation. And the children said that they were sexually molested regularly on a regular basis. These are 2, 3, 4-year-old kids. By the way, I've seen books that the cults have published that tell you how to have sex with 2 years old and newborn children. And the authorities investigated, and basically the kids said that they were taken down into the tunnels under the school. There was a chamber there. Adults in robes, chanting, candles, no clothes under their robes. That they were taken up into the trapdoor, the triplex next door, and placed in automobiles, taken out into the community and prostituted. 2, 3, 4-year-old kids now, folks. And they talked about being placed on an airplane. There was an airport about 10 minutes away. And flying up into the mountains and attending ceremonies in the mountains. They talked about human sacrifices, throwing babies into flames, throwing babies into the crematory. They talked a lot about the brown babies. We'd think they were Mexican babies and so forth. Therapists interviewed the children, started interviewing the children, began their investigation. And the people on the other side, the defense attorneys and others, because these people were ultimately charged, claimed that the therapists had planted the information in their minds. It wasn't true. The police conducted their own investigation. Basically, it was very super secret. The results were never really made available to the public. And To make a long story short, they had a trial, the longest trial, criminal trial in the history of America, 2 years plus. They tried Virginia McMartin, the old lady, and they tried Ray Bucky, the young son, the grandson of Virginia. Virginia McMartin was acquitted. Ray Bucky had a hung jury. Now, they had a second trial for Ray Bucky. And in the interim, although I had never been really actively involved in investigating that case, everybody's brother was investigating it on their own. In the interim, I was able to gain access to the property. The property had been sold from the McMartin family to Danny Davis, a defense attorney who made $3 million on the case, by the way, paid by the county, to a contractor, and he was going to construct an office building on the property. So, in the spring of '93, I, along with some parents, hired an archaeologist, Dr. Gary Stickle from UCLA, and we went out and started digging for tunnels. Now, before that, of course, we had in the newspaper, April 11, 1985, McMartin and Dick suspended, no evidence of secret tunnels. The authorities supposedly went out looking for tunnels and didn't find any. We found tunnels. The tunnels had been filled in. The children were telling the truth. We found these tunnels, as I said, in the middle of the second trial. We called the DA's office. He sent an investigator out, Mr. Perez. And Mr. Perez told me when he got out of the car, "I don't want to talk to you, Gunderson." I said, "Why not?" He said, "You argue too much." He said, "I'll go talk to the archaeologist." He went in and talked to the archaeologist. I followed him in there. And he wanted to argue with the archaeologist that we did not find tunnels there. Now, what happened is, the tunnels have been filled in. If you took a knife and went straight down, you would have foreign soil to the natural soil in that area that had been pushed into the tunnel area, the cavity of the tunnel. And that was the way that the archaeologist was able to come up with the documentation. In the, here's what we found. We found a 9-foot wide subterranean entrance under the west wall of the dog room. We found avocado tree roots cut on both sides of the entrance. A Disney bag, copyright 1982, found under the foundation right in the entrance of the tunnel. And the tunnel proceeded 45 feet through classroom 4 and 3 and so forth. The tunnels were 30 inches wide, 44 to 46 inches deep,